AFLAC is pleased to provide support for this program and supplemental health insurance for $20 million. AFLAC, insuring over 40 million people worldwide.
This program is also made possible by Enzymatic Therapy, a natural medicines company, makers of Cell Forte with IP6, a product for your body's natural cellular defenses.
And by General Re, a global provider of reinsurance and capital management solutions to help clients manage their assets, liabilities, risks, and returns.
Things become a heck of a lot less important if cancer pops into your life, and some things become a lot more beautiful and significant if cancer has popped into your life.
A spontaneous remission is a remission or the regression of cancer without treatment, without therapy, with no real explanation. They are, in a sense, mysteries.
Treat your body, your sick body, as though it were your only child. And touch it with mercy. Notice how you're sending fear into the illness.
Coming to terms with issues of death are very important for freeing up energy to live life.
And this enriches the life, whatever period of life you got left, and also strengthens the cancer defense mechanism and helps the medical program you're in.
In 1985, I was diagnosed with kidney cancer, with also cancer spreading to my lungs. I was given 3 months to live. It's now been 10 years, and to all purposes, I'm cancer-free.
The sign of healing is liberation. The sign of cure is only that you can take another step.
Oh God, why me? It's a question often asked by people with cancer in anger and anguish. It expresses the pain and the helplessness experienced by people with life-threatening illnesses. But it is usually this type of experience that draws people to explore their spirituality. But what effect can our spiritual beliefs have on our physical health or the quality of our lives? Can our prayers be answered in some way? Are spontaneous remissions examples of miracles or science? Can we experience healing without being cured? Many people report that cancer is an ironic gift, a disease that threatens their physical existence while calling them to explore their true nature and the meaning of their lives. For some, it becomes an avenue for healing, an opportunity to discover peace within, and sometimes finding that this results in a remission or cure. In this program, we'll explore these questions about life and death and the resources available for those confronting their mortality. Loved ones are lost and families are shattered, often without any help in dealing with their impending loss. We'll discuss the role that our spirituality can play when coping with the issues of loss of life, as well as the practical issues of dealing with death and dying.
There are lots of people who have spiritual beliefs and that come out, even for some people who were not so religious before they had the cancer. That seems to come out when you're facing a death sentence, or you think you might be facing a death sentence. It's and we hear lots of stories of people who feel that they that the spiritual end of it is very important to them.
The role of spiritual beliefs in stress management has been, to me, virtually ignored, and it's huge. Our beliefs about our nature, our beliefs about the creative forces of the universe, our beliefs about the meaning of life, our beliefs about death, all have huge impact on the way we live our lives. And we can explore our beliefs in these areas in the same way that we can explore our beliefs about anything else. And we can determine the relative health value.
When God is a resource, not a punisher, then some wonderful things happen for those people, and that it is physiologic. None of this is what I would call mystical. I call it all scientific, okay? That a belief in God keeps your blood pressure lower. Is that God doing it? No, it's your peace that comes with that, and with the love and all the things that go into it.
This balance of these chemical messengers, this balance of tone within the immune system, tone within the nervous system, can be influenced by the attitude, by the emotions, by the feelings of the subject. Now, some people can influence it by prayer. God bless them. I mean, let them do it. I don't do it, but they want to do it and it works, that's fine. Other people go to Lourdes, other people use relaxation, other people use meditation. In all of these cases, what's happening is you're seeing a change in balance of certain hormones. This has been documented scientifically.
In 1966, 2 American doctors did a relatively exhaustive study in which they examined the tissue and medical histories of perhaps thousands of patients and came up with a fairly large number of true documented spontaneous remissions. They only included cases where there were tissue samples so that an absolute diagnosis of cancer had been made. They only included cases where the individual received no therapy or what is today considered inadequate therapy, and yet were totally cured of their disease.
There's a big difference between saying, like the lady who literally said, I went home, decided to live to be 100 and left my troubles to God, and her cancer disappeared. It just melted away. And again, this is a lady who's been operated on 4 or 5 times. I mean, there's no laboratory error. But if I said to every patient who came into my office, leave your troubles to God, the answers are, do you know who I'm married to? I mean, do you know what job I have to have? See, Monday morning, most frequent for heart attacks. Well, if people could really leave their troubles to God and enjoy their job and their relationships, yeah, I think there'd be a lot more cases of self-induced healing.
The concept of spontaneous remission is a very important concept in cancer therapy. It shows many things. It shows that the body is capable of curing its own illnesses. A spontaneous remission is a remission or the regression of cancer without treatment, without therapy, with no real explanation. They are, in a sense, mysteries. The mysterious part is that some people experience them and others don't.
One of the things that interested me, in the middle of a workshop, a man came up to me and said, look, here's a flyer from the American Cancer Society sitting on a table outside. Now, if you open the flyer, on the left side it says, doctors have saved over half of the people who have cancer, millions of people. On this side of the page it says, self-induced healing has not been proven, and we certainly don't recommend it. Now, the thing that I think is ridiculous is, number one, the doctors don't save anybody. You save yourself. And there is only one form of healing, self-induced healing, because they recommend radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery. Well, if you couldn't heal yourself, would you get over radiation, chemotherapy, or surgery? No. I mean, somebody would cut you open and you'd fall apart again. And so the point I make is, don't say, do this, or, you know, and this is no good. This is good, and this relies on self-induced healing. They should come together.
Some people experience them with absolutely no anticipation, with absolutely no change in their daily life pattern, whereas other people experience them after they've undergone some incredible event in their life, a spiritual happening, or a significant change of diet, a psychological change in their mental attitude. But in general, I would have to say spontaneous remissions are unpredictable.
Now, if you said, should I only rely on my doctor? I'd say, no, you're making a big mistake. Should I rely on my ability only to heal? No, I think you're making a big mistake. And whether you go back to the Bible that tells us medicines and doctors are gifts from God, or anything else, I mean, you can always show people that what we're talking about is incorporating everything.
We use healing to mean to approach with mercy and awareness what areas that we have withdrawn from in anger and fear and judgment, instead of ostracizing, embracing. That's what we mean by healing. We start embracing our pain, opening to it, approaching it, brailing our way into it. And what is it? What's its texture in the body? What formations, what shapes does it make? Where is it held? How is it held?
Stephen Levine is a Buddhist, a former student of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and author of many profound books on healing and dealing with terminal illness. He and his wife, Andrea, travel internationally giving workshops.
We're not speaking necessarily of cure. When we're speaking of healing, we're talking about the human heart coming to completion. We're talking, too, about the level at which the mind sinks into the heart, where there's room for our heart, in our heart, for our pain, and for each other's pain. That's a healing. It's the healing we took birth for. It's the healing of the sense, the interdependence of all sentient beings.
A colleague of mine, an internist, Dr. Larry Dawsey, has written several books. His book, Recovering the Soul, is a wonderful title for a book by a physician because it really finally brings us back to the understanding that it's not possible to look at medicine, psychology, and spirituality as separate disciplines, that in fact they come together.
Dr. Joan Borsenko is no stranger to science, psychology, and spirituality. Psychologist and co-founder of Harvard's Mind-Body Clinic, Dr. Borsenko is also author of Guilt is the Teacher, Love is the Lesson. She and her husband lecture internationally on the nature of consciousness and healing.
The natural corollary of that, upon which all modern science is based, is that when you die, your brain dies, you lose your consciousness, that's the end. So it has no place in it for the soul. That's always been split off. It's like something else, but it's not part of medicine. Dawsey's premise is that perhaps it is part of medicine. To him, Era 3 medicine has to do with the premise that the physicists tell us is quite likely, and that is that mind is non-local. It's not a simple epiphenomenon of nervous activity in my brain and your brain. It was Einstein who once said that the illusion that we are isolated is really an optical delusion of our consciousness. The physicist Schrödinger, who invented the wave equations of quantum mechanics, likewise said, if we could measure the sum total of number of minds in the universe, in fact, there would be just one. And if you take a look and say, well, what does that really mean to me, sitting here right now? What does it mean to you? It means that some of the things that human beings have experienced all of their lives, but science has poo-pooed, need to be looked at once again.
To me, I really laugh because every time I cut my finger or get a blister, I get very happy because I put a Band-Aid on, I take it off a week later, and there's nothing there. And I think, wow, that's exciting, see? That shows me that this creative intelligence in me knows how to heal. No directions, no book, no instructions. And that's God for me, you know, this wonderful intelligence.
Beyond simple psychological self-blame, I found that a number of people also brought God into the picture. And they would say, this bad thing is happening to me because I'm being punished for my sins. And this surprised me. As a psychologist, we've been taught really that religion is kind of a taboo area, something that we don't get into. And yet, I found that most people have a real strong idea of what a higher power is for them, and that very often this idea is some leftover from childhood religious teachings that sometimes is really a beautiful ideal and really gives them self-esteem and helps them live their life in a kind and loving manner. But sometimes their idea of God was like a punitive boogeyman, kind of like a petty, mean Santa Claus looking over your shoulder to see whether or not you deserve toys.
And so there are plenty of people out there who absolutely are sure they're being punished, and so they're not even supposed to get well or get their child well because God has caught up to them for the terrible things they've done. And all of that needs to be dealt with, but isn't dealt with in medical school. Nobody ever told me that somebody might want to be operated on in order to be punished for their sins.
People who have ended up saying, not only did I cause this disease and now I'm helpless and I've got this big problem, but in addition to that, maybe God is punishing me for my sins. I found a number of what I call spiritually optimistic clergy persons who themselves have good self-esteem and who view divine like that light, all forgiving and all loving, who can take a person back to their religious tradition of origin and find the love in it instead of the fear in it. And I think that's also an important reason that some people need therapy.
Freud said, the best I can do is replace your neurotic misery with common, normal, human unhappiness. I think I'll go to a different doctor, thank you. I had a little more than that in mind. Of course, that little more is the suffering he's talking about, but that's not enough. It's not enough. And it certainly isn't our potential. Our potential is much greater than that. We can have that common, everyday, ordinary grief, that normal human unhappiness, float in something that is so enormous that, for lack of a better term, in exasperation you'd call God. But it's just the commonality of all beings. It's just beingness. It's just consciousness. It's just all. Our grief keeps us from experiencing what we are grieving, having lost. Because what we feel we have lost greatest, our greatest pain, is our homesickness for God. Now, you might not call it God. You can call it your true nature. You can call it the comfort of the heart. Certainly, any word will do because it's beyond language. It's pre-linguistic. It's pre-birth.
People have all different kinds of conceptions, preconceived notions about what love is. And for most people, they go as far as thinking that love is make nice to somebody, be nice, and that's the loving thing to do. And we ask people to go beyond that. It's not about just the make nice. It's a much larger issue. It's really being connected with the compassion and the loving kindness that's in all of us. It becomes a metaphysical or a spiritual question. Can you see the light in yourself? Can you experience yourself as a purely loving being?
Prayer groups and healing circles meet specifically to pray for those with physical ailments. There is growing evidence that prayer can positively affect one's health. One such study was conducted by Dr. Randolph Bird.
He took 400 patients admitted to the coronary intensive care unit at San Francisco General Hospital, and he randomized them into two groups. One group got their usual coronary intensive care, and the other group got usual care, plus they were prayed for at a distance by prayer groups across the country. So the prayer groups had a list of names. They'd pray for these people. Now, it was important that the study be double-blind. That means that neither the patient nor any of the staff knew who was being prayed for and who didn't. When the code was broken on the study, a fascinating result occurred. And that was that the people who were prayed for did significantly better. There were fewer cardiac arrests. There were fewer cases of pulmonary edema, which is a potentially life-threatening accumulation of fluid in the lungs. There were fewer cases of infection and less need for antibiotics. And the skeptics moved in to look at the study, which is a good thing, because this is fascinating. What could it mean? And no one has really been able to fault the study.
Throughout history, people have gone to prophets and seers who were thought to be capable of contacting an all-knowing source of wisdom within. People in spiritual and psychological disciplines believe we all have the ability to access a knowing and loving source of internal wisdom within us. Whether it is called God, the light within, or a guardian angel, some have found it capable of providing accurate information regarding healing. Scientific validation for this was provided by the psychotherapist Ralph Allison, who made an interesting discovery during hypnotherapy of patients with multiple personality disorders.
Within each person who had multiple personality disorder, there was one personality that always claimed not to have been formed at a specific moment like all the rest. Regardless of the religious background of the person involved, that personality would describe itself with terms like, I am the wisdom self, or I am a conduit for divine love, or I am the divine spark within the person. Oftentimes, this inner self would say things like, I have been with the person from the time before they took a body, and I will continue to be with that person at the time when they lay their body down. Interestingly enough, when Allison could communicate with this inner self-helper, it would give very specific feedback about the therapy and the integration of all of those disparate subpersonalities or false selves into a functional whole. And because it was such a good therapeutic ally and had such reliable information, he came to call it the inner self-helper.
And I think tapping into this inner wisdom, this resource that we all have, is, I think it's the most important aspect of my work. I think it's the most important concept that I've come upon in my life.
Dr. Carl Simonton, director of the Simonton Cancer Center, is an oncologist, author, and pioneer in the field of cancer treatment. He's an advocate of using our internal guidance as an aid in healing.
The wonderful physician Albert Schweitzer said, we all have within us a wise physician. And it was one of his favorite topics in his lecturing. And he wasn't talking about well-educated Caucasians. He was talking about the uneducated blacks of Africa that he was working with when he stated that everyone has within them a wise physician.
In 1985, I was diagnosed with kidney cancer, with also cancer spreading to my lungs. I was given 3 months to live. It's now been 10 years, and to all purposes, I'm cancer-free.
And there was a wonderful book published recently by Alice Hopper Epstein. She is a PhD sociologist who had a renal cancer. And she found that a type of psychotherapy known as psychosynthesis was very important in her recovery.
The psychosynthesists believe that we have two kinds of self. We have a personal self that involves our personality and our will, but we also have a higher self. A higher self, it's the connection with the universe. Maybe it's the connection with God. It's the best part of us. And this higher self can be used as a guide to achieve the unity that we all are after.
I would call it soul, that part of us that perhaps existed before there was a body, and if we believe all these intrepid near-death experiences, continues to exist when we put our body down. And this is a source of wisdom and a source of loving kindness within each person.
The reason the higher self was real to me is that when I went into these aspects of fantasy, I found things that were true, that were true for me, and that made me feel differently. And that helped to cure my physical illness, because within 6 weeks, the cancer was getting smaller. I mean, what more proof do you have? Personal, psychological, and physical changes. To me, that inner self was very real.
Her premise, which I would have to agree with as a cancer cell biologist, is that there might be some people like her whose cancer is particularly responsive to what goes on in the mind. And for them, a technique like this could potentially be curative.
It set me on a new path. It set me on a path of thinking about things in a different way.
And I think we're all a little bit like multiple personalities, that the work of a lifetime for each one of us is to let down those false selves and to come back in touch with the most true core of our being, which to me would be that inner self-helper. Some people might call it their intuition, some a higher self, some a divine spark, some the soul, and I think we're all talking about exactly the same thing.
The journey of life has an inevitable end. As a culture, we don't like to talk about death. It scares us. It reminds us that we too will die someday. It's even more difficult when it occurs sooner than expected, or as part of a painful, degenerative process. It's an unfortunate reality that about 50% of people who are diagnosed with cancer die within 5 years. But they are not the only victims. Families and friends are faced with this devastating experience, often with little information on how to help a loved one who is dying. In this section, we'll talk about the subject that no one really wants to talk about. We'll discuss when it's okay to say, "I want to die," and how to talk to a loved one who is engaged in the process of dying. We'll look at hospice care and the benefits of dying at home and how to deal with grief. We'll also explore the nature of death. What is the true nature of our existence? Do we have an eternal soul? Is the death of our physical body the end? Or is there something in each of us that transcends life as we know it?
Success in this work is helping people live who want to live, helping them to fight for life when they want to fight for life, helping them to die when they want to die, and helping them when they're confused and they don't know if they want to live or die, and being supportive of them during that time of confusion, which is frequent.
Fellow I know, tumor in his chest. Every once in a while you'll see him touching it. See what's happening? He says, this is the wish-fulfilling gem. If I want to live my life, this keeps reminding me, it's all mine. I have never been so free. I have never been beyond my conditioning or my boundaries so much as I am in this moment, knowing I only have 6 months to live. I've never been so alive. With that aliveness, with that attention to the moment, your priorities become clear. You know what to do. Some people, maybe they want to go to a monastery. Some people, maybe they want to at last see grandma or their kids or their old lovers. Some people may want to make amends. Some people may finish their 12-step program. Some people may take their first step on a new program.
You see, if we get to where we aren't so concerned with life and with living, and so we're comfortable with living and we're comfortable with dying, then we have freedom to move. But there's so much of our culture that's caught up into that death is terrible. Death is to be avoided at all costs. And even thinking about death is to be avoided. So as a result, we have this huge constriction of our vital resources, of our body's vital energy, that goes pushing thoughts of death away rather than opening our arms to it. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult.
None of us know how long we have to live. It's just that the cancer patients come and have to confront that. Most of us go through life thinking we're going to be here forever, and you never are made to come up short with the fact that you may not have another 100 years to be here. Cancer patients, I think, are very different people from the rest of us, because no matter how much you live after you've had that diagnosis, you have confronted the fact that you are not immortal.
It's important for us to pay attention to our own inner wisdom. And for some people, it's not the right time to explore death. And the way that we can best test that for ourselves is to explore our feelings. So I encourage people to use this, to go inside, ask themselves, is this a good time for me to explore my beliefs about death? If the answer to that is yes, then go into it with gusto, because it's one of the most exciting releases that we can experience, because we have created such unhealthy beliefs in our culture. So we're so sick around our beliefs about death that there's huge room for improvement.
And when someone's in the sick mode, you do everything possible to help them get better. And you urge them and you work with them to get the best medical treatment, the best physical treatment, the best psychological treatment, the best of everything. Fighting for their life, their fullest, richest life. But sometimes a person reaches a point where they're so exhausted, there's such a deep psychological exhaustion, it almost feels like a physical adrenal exhaustion. It's not, but it feels like it. Where there's nothing left to fight with. And at that point, the approach of the therapist has to change, and the approach of the person himself has to change. Not, how do I change things? But how do I understand things? How do I understand the meaning of my life? What do I have to do yet to complete it, to go peacefully, and to leave it peacefully? To give up the hatreds, the sadnesses, and so forth. What do I have to do to make peace with my life? We do this by understanding it.
Around the time that they are no longer ambulatory, a certain level of denial drops away from us. You know, even the family, many people we know, the mother may have breast cancer that's metastasized, but the kids are saying, you look so great. You're cooking all the meals, you're still mommy. You couldn't be too sick. That's the point at which not only the patient's natural denial may be broken, but the family's.
Some people know it's going to happen, you know, weeks ahead of time. It's a knowing. And they'll try to talk about it. Nobody wants to listen. Everybody's trying to, like, talk them out of it because it's very uncomfortable to listen to. And other people, I'm sure that doesn't happen until the moment, you know, that they really let go and die. And for some people, it's a matter of finishing unfinished pieces of business. And when that's done, they know they're comfortable now with letting go. And for some people, it's a matter of they've done a lot of work and they begin to say, what's the point, you know? And it's not a giving up kind of a thing. It's just an acknowledgement that I've been through a lot, I've learned a lot, maybe it's time to go and it's okay.
People ask us really frequently, very frequently, how do I take away the denial of my loved one? Why would you take away the denial of your loved one? What's going on in you? It may be your denial that's causing the problem, not theirs. It's their dignity. If your mom lived her life not wanting to talk about death, what makes you think she's going to want to talk about it on her deathbed? I mean, it's wishful thinking. We have to watch that wishful thinking because there's also an element where that person is dying. We may want them to die our death for us. We may want them to have a beautiful death according to all the recipes.
Oftentimes, the patient will know and even accept that they are dying, but it's family members who are not accepting. And it is very, very common for the patient to begin to open a conversation about their dying, and for the son or daughter or spouse to say, "Oh, no, 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 Dad, don't talk about that. You know, we don't want to talk about that," or, "Oh, you're going to be fine," or whatever. And, you know, this does the patient a disservice because it doesn't allow them to prepare meaningfully for their death.
Meg Spinella is a pastoral counselor who works with the dying and their families.
If you don't know how to love them when they're dying, then one of the best ways to express your love is to be willing to sit and listen to their story and to really express a desire to know who they are. You know, I want to know who you are. I want to know what your life was about. And in your learning what their life is about, they will learn what it's about. And the stories can go on as long as that person is able to talk.
And they began to talk. And he kept asking her things like, what was the most important decision you ever made, and why? What was the time in your life you were most really you? What would you like to have changed in your life? What would you not have changed? The kinds of questions we ask somebody when we really want to get to know them. We meet somebody we love, for example, and want to get to know them. This is the kind of very deep questions. You don't ever ask these questions unless you're going to stay and hear the answer, by the way. And they began to talk more and more. And as she was talking, she would say things like, "Oh, that was the reason I did that. Oh, now I understand what that was about." And very shortly, the complaints about the pain and the food and so forth began to drop out. And they began to talk more and more about the serious things, what her life was really like, what kind of person she really was. And he began to tell her things he'd never spoken of before. And presently, he began to tape record some of these for her grandchildren. And finally, she took the tape recorder one night and recorded a message to be read at her funeral to him, telling him how much this had meant to her. And her whole dying process changed. She was doing what we're supposed to do in the dying process.
19-year-old boy, brain tumor. His brother's youngest son, he's just getting out of the house. Everybody's just out of the house. He's the last one out of the house. He can just see his apartment, literally, down the street, just got his car, diagnosis, brain tumor. When I meet him, it's about a year later, shaven head, scars, very thin, in a hospital, looks like it's the last round. And he is ripped angry. He says, "What's going to happen when I die?" And I said, well, I don't know, but Raymond Moody talked to all these people, and it's pretty common knowledge amongst the hundreds of thousands of people who have had near-death experiences, a tunnel, a light, great being. He said, well, will I be able to make it thunder and lightning out? I said, I don't know. I said, you may, but my sense is that the experience, the process of death itself, will bring things into order in a way, into understanding, into acceptance in a way that's very difficult now. You may not have nothing to be angry with. You may not feel that kind of separation. I don't know. I don't know. He said, what about this light? I said, well, people speak of meeting a being of light, of power, of compassion, of intelligence. He said, oh, I'm going to meet Spock. Now, if I said to him, no, no, it's Jesus, or no, no, it's Buddha, you waste the person, and you might as well leave the room, because that's the end of that conversation. I think a lot of dying children see Leonardo from Mutant Ninja Turtles. Their image, and I think that is exactly the way you'd work with someone who's dying. You wouldn't overlay a Buddhist idea, you wouldn't overlay a Christian idea, a Hebrew idea. You'd hear what their idea is of the sacred, and you'd go with it.
Every part of life has a task, and the task of the dying time is to understand the meaning of our life, to comprehend it, to see the total as if we're listening to a total symphony, putting the parts together with different themes that rise and swell. When someone is dying, what you do is you help them understand the meaning of their life, what they have to do to understand more completely, to forgive themselves for the things that happen to them, to forgive others, and so they can go peacefully wherever they go from there.
Woman calls. My mother is dying in the Jewish hospital in Brooklyn. I'm going to go over and I'm going to read her the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I said, oh my God, don't do that. Dying's hard enough. She doesn't need yidams and takas and this and that coming out of the bushes with 6 heads and no feet. She, you know, she needs Moishe and Uncle Sam and the Catskills. You don't want to give her a terrain that's unfamiliar. So don't read her the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Go sing her Yiddish love song. That will make her passage easier. You say, well, in Yiddish love songs, there's no sense of emptiness. There's no sense of the Dharmata and our true light. When it's your turn on your deathbed, you do that one. Mom's way, her dignity, Yiddish love songs. Remind her of her heart. Don't call her heart Jewish. Don't call it Christian. Don't call it Buddhist. The true heart, what Buddha, what Jesus experiences, has nothing to do with Buddhism. Nothing whatsoever. Has nothing to do with Christianity. It is the essence that existed before mind thought its first thought that created the idea of God. It is God before God.
It's very important when a patient knows that they're approaching death for them to decide where it is they'd like to die. And the reason that this is important is that if they're not active in that decision making, the whole medical world can kind of take over. Now, there can be limitations on where someone can die based on what their family can provide and so forth. But basically the choices are to die in your home with the support of hospice, to die in a inpatient hospice, which can either be a freestanding hospice or a hospice within a hospital, or to die in a hospital, either on a ward or a unit or in an ICU, or to die in a nursing home.
John Abbott is the Director of Public Relations at Connecticut Hospice, the first hospice ever established in the United States.
Hospice care is provided by an interdisciplinary team and is designed to meet total needs of both the patient and the family unit during the time of the illness. Hospice care also continues beyond the illness of the patient into the bereavement period by providing constant supportive help for families for a year or more after the death of a patient.
I think there are 2 things that are very important for family and friends of people with terminal illnesses to be aware of. First is that there are choices and opportunities for optimizing the care of that patient. Second, that treatments can be directed to improving the symptoms and well-being of the patient without sacrificing their identity and their dignity. These resources may be available in a variety of settings, but are the particular specialty and expertise of the hospice program.
The goals of hospice care begin with the premise that both the patient and the family are the unit of care and must be provided for during what obviously is a traumatic time in anyone's journey through life. The goals also provide for the concept that everyone must be as free of pain and symptoms as is any way possible during the time of the illness. Pain and symptom management not only encompasses physical aspects of pain, but also social, psychological, and spiritual pain, a multifaceted kind of dilemma which faces anyone who has a terminal illness.
Grief is a loss reaction. When it's someone who you love, they become a mirror for your heart. When you love someone, when they come in the room, you say, "I love you," you just are overwhelmed with this whoosh of love. That's not coming from them, it's coming from you. So when a loved one dies, quite literally, you lose the mirror for your heart. You break a level of connection with yourself, with the heart. It's hard to get by the mind. Someone's heart has drawn you by the mind, and that heart's not there. It is a terrible loss of self. When someone says, "When she died, I lost part of myself," you bet that's exactly what happened, quite literally. You lost a part of yourself that you didn't have before. Maybe she was there so much, and now is absent again, is obscured again.
I know personally, with me, one of the most important issues in dealing with my father. First of all, coming to accept that he was going to die, and that I was powerless to change that, and all I really could do was love him, was very difficult and very important. It was also important for me to accept that I was doing all that I knew how to do, so that after his death, that I wouldn't guilt myself to death, saying that I should have done things differently from the way that I did them. And I see this oftentimes in family members, that it's important that they come to terms, that they honor that they're doing the best that they can, so that when the results that we don't want come about, we then can move on with our lives and not be stuck saying, "Well, I should have done this, I should have done that," and kill ourselves. Guilting. Again, this is the unhealthy guilt that we can easily kill ourselves with.
What is more natural than grief? It just shows how far we've gotten from our true heart, that we have to ask what to do with pain. That is sadder than that there's pain in the world. That we don't know that when you're sad you cry, when you're happy you laugh, and you pay attention during both. Try to keep your heart open during both. That is a really sad question. What do we do with grief? And we're asked all the time. You know what this country needs is temples for grieving. Maybe old-style Greek temples, open, no-roof temples with reflecting ponds, where people just sit and weep into the water. I think that the closest we've gotten to that is the quilt, the AIDS quilt, and the Vietnam memorials. They are spectacular examples of what this country needs. We need temples for weeping.
There is, for example, something called the National Opinion Research Council at the University of Chicago. And they polled Americans in the 1970s and then again in the 1980s on common, quote, paranormal experiences. And I don't like that word. I think they're really quite normal experiences. But things that really are based on this thought that consciousness might be shared. For example, 5% of the American public, that's 8 million people, have had near-death experiences. It's hard to open a magazine these days without seeing some report of a near-death experience. This changed me as a medical scientist and a psychologist When I had patients who came to me and said, look, I had a near-death experience, and would describe a sequence of lifting out of their bodies, looking down, seeing their bodies, moving through a tunnel, and then about 50% of them would talk about coming out into the presence of a light that they describe just like the mystics, whether you talk about Christian mystics or Jewish mystics or Buddhist mystics or Hindu mystics. They say things like, the light is unknowable, it's ineffable. But when pressed to describe it, they will use words like, it is all loving, all forgiving, all wisdom, that in the presence of the light they would recognize their own inner purity and recognize their part in the divine plan. That poll at the National Opinion Research Council also indicated that 67% of all Americans have said that they have been in contact with dead loved ones at some point. Over 50% have had experiences of ESP, knowing things in ways that their physical senses could not have told them. About a third of Americans say that they have been lifted out of themselves and had some transcendent experience. Now, when you measure these people in terms of mental health, interestingly, they score at the top of the scale for mental adjustment. So we're not talking about a few crackpots who've had weird experiences. We're talking about who are the most functional people in our society. And these people turn out to be very loving people and really very down-to-earth people.
Life and death. I try only to speak from my own experience. I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you survive the body. That we're not the body. There are ways of experiencing in the body that you are other than the body. Like the dying meditation, breath. What I would do is, I would listen to, Buddha said, somebody asked this of Buddha. He says there's 33 possibilities of what happens after death. He laid out this extraordinary, he's a smart fellow, a real Wittgenstein, really laid out all the possibilities, and almost in doing, defined all the religions of the world. He said, even if you were right about what happened, which one of the 33, it'd still be a guess. What difference does it make?
Vegetarians die, marathon runners die, great saints and mystics also die. And if you look at some of the greatest saints of the Christian church and of the Eastern church, they died of cancer. And they didn't die because their emotions were unhealed or because they didn't meditate well enough. And I think we need to leave some room for the sacred mystery and the unknown in our equation as well.
Talking about Freud, he was trying to understand, here's an example of models, trying to understand why in the analysis of the people he was working with, the subconscious, the underdream, if you will, has no concept for its own death. Now, he had an extraordinary piece of information in the palm of his hand, what we could call a fact. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. He had a fact in the palm of his hand. He had an enormous effect on Western culture. He did this with a couple of other things, too. He did it with, well, we don't need to get into it, but... So he had this fact, the subconscious mind has no concept for its own death. Imagine if he had stayed in the scientific modality of, now what does this mean? But instead he had a model. He came to this investigation with a model, extremely unscientific. I mean, one of the exquisiteness of science, and it's part of the living spirit that's died in science, just like it's died in religion, is that you come to it with great don't know. You come to it open to the truth. Well, Freud said, well, I have a model that we die. See, if you come to it with a model, we die. You can't find the truth. Maybe the reason the underdream, the subconscious, has no concept for its own death, because we don't die. Good. He had it.
One of the first people that I ever had the privilege to sit with as they were dying was a young physician. And her feeling was that consciousness really was a function of the brain, and that when she died, that would be the end of her consciousness, and that was that. Well, I sat with her as she was dying, And many people who are dying kind of float out of consciousness and they come back. They float out and they come back. And I asked her after one of these episodes, I said, well, where were you? Like, where do you go when you're not here? And she looked at me and she started to laugh and she said, you know, Joan, I was completely wrong. And she described that she had floated out of her body, seen us down below, floated through the wall, seen her record at the nursing station, read her chart, which I've found since is a fairly common thing for people in hospitals with out-of-body experiences to do. And the most beautiful part of this was that she came back and she told me that on the other side there was a light. And she told me about the tremendous sense of love and peace and beauty and the magnificence of that light and the magnificence of the human soul. And here I'd gone to console her in her time of dying. And the beautiful part of it was that she ended up consoling me, that was one of those kinds of experiences that will, for me, stay there for a lifetime and encourage me in moments when I identify with one of my own false selves and I forget that core of love and peace and beauty, a spark of which resides in our own heart as our most true identity.
There's this moment of expansion and that moment of expansion, and the moving from this element of solidity, a little more fluidity, more radiant feeling. Moment to moment being is consciousness. In life, in death. It's like saying in night and day, you're still existing. It's just, death's just a change in lifestyle.
While on your journey to survive cancer, you may discover something else, that maybe there is more to living and dying than we commonly believe. As the poet John Donne wrote, "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die." Cancer, while confronting us with death, also can be an opportunity. Ironically, an opportunity to learn about life. As hard as it may be, we hope you'll try to see an opportunity in cancer, an opportunity to heal as a person, to increase the capacity and the quality of your life, and maybe, just maybe, make a difference in your body's ability to overcome cancer. We hope these programs will help you increase your odds for survival and help you to find whatever else you are seeking on your healing journey.
For more information, www.cancersurvival.com.
AFLAC is pleased to provide support for this program and supplemental health insurance for 21 million sons. AFLAC, insuring over 40 million people worldwide.
This program is also made possible by Enzymatic Therapy, a natural medicines company, makers of Cell Forte with IP6, a product for your body's natural cellular defenses.
And by General Re, a global provider of reinsurance and capital management solutions to help clients manage their assets, liabilities, risks, and returns.
The 4-part VHS of Cancer, Increasing Your Odds for Survival, is available for $69.95 and $6.95 shipping and handling. The companion guide is available for $15.95 and $3.95 shipping and handling. Call 1-800-443-2156 or mail your check to CPTV Offer, P.O. Box 82, Hopkinton, Massachusetts 01748.